Welcome to the Mormon Medium Podcast, where we'll talk about spirituality, the paranormal, religion, and my journey in becoming a Mormon medium. I'm Nanette Ride. Thanks for listening. Now let's go have some fun.
Don't be afraid. Close your eyes. There's a moon overhead, but the sun will rise. Blood on our lips, such a poisonous bite. The sound of our hearts go bump, bump, bump in the night.
Hello and welcome to the Mormon Medium Podcast. I'm Brad and I'm here with Nanette, the Mormon Medium, and Justin Stum, our special guest.
I'm super glad to be on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. Nan, what are we going to talk about?
We have been talking about different types of religion and people leaving them and people going through grief and loss and how to learn how to deal with it, how to not be lost, you know?
Yeah, and we're super lucky because Justin came in here very well prepared. He's got a legal pad with pages of information and references to help people work through some of those problems and some of that trauma that is sometimes associated with leaving. What's the term you call not organized religion? How do you phrase it?
A faith tradition.
A faith tradition. It's difficult, and he's got a lot of great information that we're going to go over.
I love it because it's not, a faith tradition is not a bad thing to leave, right? You should be asking the questions to see if something resonates with your soul. What I'm trying to understand is the way people treat other people that do leave. It just, that doesn't resonate with my heart or my soul at all. It's just painful. I have so many clients that come to me and they're like, now what? I've left. Now what? Do I even believe in God anymore? Do I even believe in anything anymore? And it's like they have to deconstruct everything and then reconstruct it all.
And it is that way. I like the way that you framed that there is within this sphere of identity development and faith expansion or religious or theological or faith-based growth, there is that, you talked about it as deconstruction. I frame it a couple different ways, and you'll hear it depending on the religion or faith tradition that you may be a part of or be affiliated with, this idea of a faith crisis, right? This more acute, oh boy, is what I'm pouring my time and energy and sometimes money and funds and relationships into real? As we think about the last episode, as we kind of operationalize that term real or true. And something that's altogether different, which would be a faith expansion, right? We're moving, we're reconsidering, per what you just mentioned now. And hey, are these teachings or principles or practices or rules or covenants or commandments in alignment with what I believe? That's this expanding place as those things are reconsidered. And then a faith transition, which is much, as I frame it, much more about a direction and a movement. Doesn't mean we're physically moving somewhere per se, but it might be that we're doing that. And it's interesting to think about because there's the piece that you added, this fourth piece of that is this deconstruction. I think of bricks as you were talking about, that these kind of tumble down, and sometimes they tumble faster than others. Some individuals may be analyzing a piece at a time. And it's an interesting process. It's been interesting to watch as you look at other organizations that are ebbing and flowing based on an ecclesiastical leader or a prophet or some individual who is kind of the tip of the spear for the faith in terms of their communing with the divine. It appears as we look at what we'll say, as we look at some of the exposing of Scientology, for example, and Leah Remini's work, even over the last 5 to 6 years, that there is this challenge in those upper echelons of leadership within Scientology, within Mormonism, the rise and fall of Warren Jeffs within the fundamentalist LDS community. There is this real challenge to, and question, at least by parishioners, and that is, are those that lead the organization that I'm in, are they in alignment with the God that I follow? And that's really this other kind of crisis we haven't mentioned and is altogether speculative, because unless you're talking to those that lead those faiths, we wouldn't know, but a truth crisis. Are they in a position, as more research comes out, more about how these organizations were founded and more of the historical truths and or current policies are unfolded, it puts those that are leading, at least in this space, in a really interesting time and frame, because they're standing upon the leaders of those before them. And while some individuals may be in a faith crisis or faith expansion or faith transitionary space, it's possible, again, I'm speculating softly here, that those that are leading are in a truth crisis. Like, what is even
Definitely.
real, and what are we teaching these
Interesting.
people as
Well,
we...
hopefully they are. If they have any kind of integrity, they are.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I think a lot of them might just be immersed in the money and not care. It's a business, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's just
Well,
my
they do
thought.
say that ultimate power corrupts ultimately.
Ultimately, yes.
Right?
Yeah,
When you're the tip of the spear, how much more powerful do you get?
it's true. You don't.
And that's something to consider, because as soon as Bernie Brown said something interesting that it just came up in my mind, per Brad's comment there, that as soon as an organization, it could be a government perhaps, or a school system, in this case we're talking about faith traditions, as soon as the focus becomes more about protecting the institution than the people, than the parishioners, then it's possible, again, I'm paraphrasing Brené's language here, that accountability is dead and the ethics are corrupt, because it's more about the support of the establishment and the moving forward of the freight train of the faith than it is to really reevaluate internally, hey, is what we're teaching grounded in goodness? And is it benefiting and promoting connectivity and holiness within our parishioners? Or are we simply attempting in our own ecclesiastical arrogance to protect the organization and to protect our image so that other parishioners don't move into a faith expansion or faith crisis space? And so we see faith really, this retrenchment among those that lead, to attempt to keep people in, if but for to keep the momentum of the institution going, versus a slowdown, at least per my perception, a slowdown. And let's reevaluate if there are those on the margins or within that are being harmed by the teaching or by the policy.
I like to think that there's goodness enough in people that they care, but I don't feel like that is on the radar.
Well, but think of it this way, guys. What if, in order to protect the people, you have to protect the institution, right? Because if the institution is besmirched and people start leaving, well, now you're no longer protecting the people because they're leaving and their eternal joy is jeopardized because you allowed the institution to be damaged, right?
Good
point. So if you were trying to think of it very objectively, they may be going, well, wait a minute, we have to protect both. It's the chicken or the egg, right?
Good point.
That is a good point. Huh.
So maybe there's more good in there than maybe some of us realize.
I like to hope so. I would like to hope so. I just see so many people that are harmed, and I'm not talking just in Mormonism. I'm talking across the board. For some reason, there's something happening on the earth right now that people are searching for truth. They're searching for peace inside their soul. And I don't know exactly why. I just know it's a thing, and I keep getting hit with it. My clients are like crazy about it. They want the spirituality, not so much the religion.
Well, and Justin, you commented on that a little bit in our earlier talk about how you're seeing these younger generations moving away from that organization and doing more of the, hey, it's right for me. Why do you think that is?
I think some of it is, if we go back and look at the rollout of the internet, we'll just kind of use that perhaps as a starting place in the late 90s. The internet provided a momentum of a colossal amount of information that churches or faith-based organizations couldn't control. And so what ends up happening is we have a lot more people reading a lot more information, some legitimate about a particular faith and some not. But then as soon as we have a MySpace, remember that? MySpace comes online, Facebook comes online, and now we have Snapchat. Like the way we relate and communicate has altogether changed. And so we end up with a lot more individuals attempting in their own way to determine truth, not based on what's in the Encyclopedia Britannica or World Book. And I'm
Right.
going back to late 80s here with information.
You mean the way we used to have to write our papers?
Yeah, right. I know, right.
Right. We didn't get Google to look everything up
Yeah.
for us. We had to go and search it out in newspaper articles and magazines and encyclopedias
Right.
at the library.
At the library. I was
Wait.
going to say I couldn't afford them. I had to go to the library.
You have to actually go, is that it's shifted in terms of how we obtain information. So there's greater exposure to more ideas and it was easier. I mean, as we think of James Fowler and his 6 stages, it's 7 because there's a stage 0, but I like to say 6, but 6 or 7 stages of faith development. It's interesting to think that it was easier for individuals to stay in a more immature spiritual place before the advent of the internet. And what I mean by that is that individuals could stay in this stage 3 where institutional authority was kind of the way it was, and there was more fear around staying versus leaving, and that there was, of course, community identity with that. And so individuals, most didn't move into stages 4, 5, and 6, at least per his developmental model. They didn't have room to say, as Dan said earlier, is this in alignment with me? And so the shift, I think, with those generations is they're no longer appealing to authority. They're less concerned about obedience, which is doing what you're told no matter what is right.
Mm-hmm.
And they're more concerned about morality, which is doing what's right no matter what you're told.
Oh,
So think about that for a minute. That's their concern. They want more community, more connection, and divinity in a different way. At least that's my experience as a therapist. I'm 2 decades in, and that's my experience, at least of those generations that tend to seek that. I think there's some generous among a few others within those Mormon populations that have done enough research to say, yeah, the old guard and this idea of loyalty and obedience and binary rigidity is no longer appealing to them, and they'll look elsewhere for it.
So do you think that they're going to have to do some serious rebranding as they continue, like churches in general, to attract these younger people who are thinking differently?
Yeah, I think there is. That's a great question. I've got to think about that for a minute. There is this, and I say this respectfully of leaders of any faith. I'll speak specifically about Mormonism as it's predominant within the community where I live, but this gerontocracy, right? These individuals that are in their 80s who are leading and have a lot of wisdom, a lot of life experience, and these councils where they network, which is fantastic for any faith, I think. The question is you've got to be really aware of, and I see this within any faith, not Mormonism, so there's no finger pointing here specifically, your ecclesiastical arrogance that, hey, we've got it figured out because we're communicating with deity. If in fact you find, per your research, and Mormonism is one of those faiths that conducts more than others on outcome data, like what are the 20 to 26 data engineers we have in Salt Lake telling us, which is very different than what is God telling us. And I suppose that could be God through engineers, depending on how individuals frame that. But I think that many faiths appear, at least as a therapist, as I work with people in these positions, faith expansion, faith crisis, faith transition, are leaning and looking, as Nan said, they're seeking, but they're looking more through a lens of individual authority. That what I say matters, what I believe matters, and I get to determine that. It doesn't have to be a function of my neighborhood or my parents. But prior to the internet and all that information, I think it was really different. It was much more about tradition.
it was. It absolutely was. I remember those days. Yeah.
Well, and even a lot of the teachings, right? You always hear, well, that's not doctrine, right? But it's what was taught as we were growing up. And people go, well, that wasn't doctrine. But
It became
was
culture.
still part of the culture.
Yeah, it was. It was like when I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to play with kids with a different color of skin, and especially kids that weren't Mormon. And I didn't see the difference. So me being in classic Aries, I just did it anyway. And I would get in trouble, but I still did it anyway because I didn't see the difference. I didn't see the harm in any of that kind of stuff. But that is how I was taught. Some of the things I was taught.
And that's the struggle, I think, as we look at any worldwide religion, as the teachings become founded in ideas that come from a variety of different places. Either they're founded by those that happen to be leading, We have to look at patriarchy. We have to start considering, hey, what is actually happening here in terms of how and why that teaching. And so, interestingly enough, to support Nan, and maybe you could comment on that in terms of your experience as I grew up in a variety of different settings, but you have Mormon apostles who have, I'm just kind of pinging off your statement there and going from memory, so it's going to be pretty close to quoted, but the black race will never hold the priesthood of the Almighty. And for those that aren't Mormon, that means God's power, right? The priesthood is this
100%.
authority. Like if that's the teaching, that they'll never hold the priesthood of the Almighty, at least by this particular apostle who was speaking as such. He's clearly speaking about theology. While I'm hearing what was said earlier, like, hey, that's maybe not doctrine, that was culture. At the end of the day, the culture is a symptom of the teachings in a trickle-down, top-down system. And so your experience kind of resisting the grain around those who were of color
Yes.
was based on your heart. But for others, maybe the parents or those that pushed back, they were leaning upon that institutional authority that this is a race of people that won't hold God's power. And
Exactly.
we have Mormon apostles teaching us such.
Exactly. And I remember hearing that across the pulpit as a kid and thinking how wrong it was, because I had black friends. I knew families, and I loved them. They were good people and there was nothing wrong with them. And I didn't see the difference between their family and mine. I literally, you could say I was colorblind, but I
colorblind.
don't, I see different cultures. I see people from different parts of the world. I don't see, oh, you're black, you're yellow, you're white. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And America is a melting pot. Like, I don't get the big deal. None of us are natives, so we all came from different places. I mean, I think I have African blood in me and British blood. I mean, talk about a mix. Like, we're all a bunch of mutts. So why are we like even pointing any fingers anywhere? There isn't anyone that's a pure blood anything. So I don't know. Even back then as a kid, that's how I felt. I didn't get it. I thought it was wrong back then. I also thought, I mean, I'm extremely spiritual now. I thought when I got the gift of the Holy Ghost when I was 8 years old, after I got baptized, I remember having all those men put their hands on my head. And I remember looking up going, this is so dumb. I already have this. I don't need them to give it to me. They don't need to give me anything. At 8 years old, I knew that I already had it. Like, I've been seeing Christ since I was a little kid. I came from an abused home. Like, it was a normal thing for me as a kid. But I think, I don't know, the religion just twerks it a little bit, or tweaks it, not twerks. It tweaks it a little bit.
I see where your mind's going.
Twerking.
I like it.
Okay, so Brad is up twerking right now.
I'm actually very good at it.
I'm covering my eyes.
Smart.
I'm feeling a lot of shame right now. Oh, I love it.
Yes, Justin goes bright red. You can't.
I had to
turn
throw
the
shame
therapist
in
red.
there. I know, right? I'd laugh. This is good.
So what do you have in your little book of
What do I
notes
have?
there?
Not a whole lot other than...
There's like 5 pages. Now, I'm pretty sure he's like an attorney on his part-time job because he's got this
Right,
legal
I've got
pad and
the
he's just
yellow
scribbling
legal pad.
everything down. And
I'm going to try to see if I can decipher this.
he was
But
a
no, I think...
policy debater in high school.
Right. It's just this idea of, well, 2 things. We've already covered this concept of cognitive dissonance, right? These inner warrings of ideas that are competing, but within the same individual, that create just massive amounts of pain in people when it's, let's say, and as we think about just faith expansion, if it's, hey, my inner knowing here, and I'm using kind of the Mormon faith as a context on this one, I really feel strongly that I want to drink green tea for personal reasons. It's healthy for me. There's antioxidants in it. And I don't want to wear underwear that's issued by the faith that I'm a part of. And this is a good hypothetical example to kind of talk about this dissonance idea.
Because they are not sexy.
They're not sexy. They are not. And this idea that, okay, and I say this with all due respect, but as we conceptualize Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, and we're going to start talking about Eastern faith and superstition, as they look at the Mormon undergarment, they would say, well, you're wearing superstitious underwear. And while many active Mormons would see that as offensive, the reality of it is they are.
Yeah.
And
true.
while there could be a mock of these FLDS individuals, but an hour or two from where I live for their outer garment or clothing and these prairie dresses, right? That there can be this, I don't want to wear the Mormon undergarment and I want to drink green tea, and that's within alignment with my inner knowing. But per Mormon protocol, at least as it is in April of 2023, if I'm not willing to do that, I can't be a part of this premier ordinance, right? Of this temple marriage or sealing, as Mormons refer to it as. I can't do that. And so the dissonance can grow really high. Do I stop drinking tea, put the underwear back on, go in the temple to participate in this family activity? So dissonance, I think, is just something to highlight that is really active. In addition to another felt experience, and that's just confirmation bias, and that goes within the world of religion and politics, and that is the tendency to look for what we already believe to confirm that we're correct. Right? We see within politics, right? So someone says, well, this guy is no longer... this particular individual is no longer a part of this fundamentalist FLDS sect in southern Utah, this part of Arizona, and he didn't follow the commandments and teachings of our supreme leader, this one individual that communes with deity, and leaves and cuts his hand, right? Well, that happened. This construction worker cut his hand because he no longer has God's blessing. And so a parishioner may say that's why that happened.
Gotcha.
So it's where we line these things up to confirm that we believe that we're right. And all people do it within politics and religion on all sides of the fence. So I think it's important for your listeners to start to look at their own confirmation bias, right? Mm-hmm. And their own dissonances within as they look to say, what is in alignment with my integrity? What resonates for me? And it's okay, though it's been postulated within Mormonism, at least of recent, that cafeteria, at least by the Mormon prophet over the last year, those that participate, I'm paraphrasing, in cafeteria Mormonism, will always lead to misery.
So that's picking and choosing
Yes,
what you want
right.
to believe in within a religion, right?
Right. And so there was that pushback on, no, you have to believe this. The difficulty is, if you look at any of these religions, of the 9 or 10 I've mentioned even in the last 10 minutes, that's what all people are doing.
Yes.
They're all picking and choosing. And very few people are checking all the boxes with their belief because they're human.
So, Justin, that quote you just said kind of bothers me.
Tell me.
That if you are a cafeteria Mormon, it leads to misery. Mm-hmm. Wording like that is super strong and super powerful,
That's
right?
because you're a lunch lady, boy.
Oh, my God.
You're a lunch lady.
Okay.
There we were. There we were.
There we were.
This morning, we're
I'm sorry I had to go there.
So we listened to the Lunch Lady song today by Adam Sandler like 3 or 4 times.
Oh,
And
nice.
I'm not exactly sure how it started, but we were just talking in the kitchen, and next thing I know, Nan talked about Sloppy Joes. And the chorus
Sloppy
is,
Joe, Sloppy Joe.
yeah,
That's part of the chorus.
Sloppy Joe. Anyway, yeah. Speaking of cafeterias,
Right.
He's a cafeteria
we
guy, though.
love
He
our
has
lunch
been.
ladies. No, I've always been a cafeteria guy, but the language is really what gets me. Is it leads to misery. Misery is such a powerful word. Why would they use a word that evokes such strong emotion?
There's a few ideas I have on this one. One of which is this idea of intention guessing, and all humans do it, me included. I don't know that I could say all. That's a pretty broad stroke of the brush. I would say most humans are intention guessing. And as mammals, we tend to do that, right? We attempt to guess the motive or intention of someone else. As we notice, monitor, witness their behavior, that becomes less about what we think is happening and more about what is happening because we're watching it. But we're talking about an intention that I can't know, but I can't speculate. So let's go there for a minute. I think the language is it's part of that retrenchment that we talked about either in the last episode or this one. And that is that leaders within Mormonism, and again, we're just using that kind of as a small model here among faiths. We could be talking about other faiths as well, but where it's, hey, you really need to get with the program. Like, this is what we're doing. But the reality of it is, as people expand about it, like the universe expands, as people are expanding, and we're better understanding how we operate as human beings in this spiritual experience, right? It's a lot easier, I think, in so many ways, to double down and say, well, we're not going to move things because we're the same yesterday, today, and forever, and this kind of rhetoric. But the reality is most of those faiths are expanding. I don't find that they're very public about it. And what I mean by that is, okay, these things are okay, but they weren't okay then.
Right.
Things like this particular article of clothing, or we'll use tattoos within Mormonism, is something that you would counsel your parents about in April 2023 and then move forward with. But there are speeches or sermons 20 or 30 years ago about that being sinful.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is this expansion even within faith. I look at faith, or at least the institutional growth of different religions, like a cruise ship. And I don't know if you've been on a cruise, I'm sure, at some point.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And that is just, they don't turn very fast. They're massive and they turn really slowly. And as you see some of those ebbings and flowings, you're seeing these institutions start to shift. But I think that the questions for the parishioner are less about attempting to challenge the ship too much, unless that is in alignment with the inner knowing of the individual, and more what's going to work for me. What is uplifting? What is divine? What is holy? What makes me whole? And what is in alignment with what I believe, which is very different than, am I following the rules, right? This obedience versus morality argument.
Right. How do you get past the guilt, the shame? You know what I mean? So you're shamed by friends, by family, people that are still in. How do you get past feeling guilty inside that you've done something wrong when you know it's right? A lot of people get that kind of heat and they just go back because it's easier just to go back and live a lie than to go forward not knowing how to step forward because you've been told what to do this whole time. And all of a sudden you have to do your own work. You have to find your own truth. And that's scary for so many. How can that journey be not scary? Have you not feel the guilt and the pain from the shunning that happens? Do you know what I'm saying?
Let's do this per that question. If we operationalize or break down guilt so that we're all on the same page, maybe we can go with my definition.
Okay.
Because I like to be right, at least on this one. I'm kidding.
You should
I don't
be.
have to be right. Brad will challenge me here in a minute. Let's say, I love this.
Has that become my role?
No,
I think it has.
no, I don't
You're
know
the
that he's
cynic.
that challenging. Actually, it's good. I need the challenge. And that is that I'm framing or articulating guilt as an experience that one would have, or in this case, we'll use me, Justin, the self, that I'm having, that something I'm doing is grieving my value system or my beliefs, or it grieves if I'm looking at a deity or a supreme being or beings plural, it grieves my maker or it grieves me. And that leads me to this feeling that I don't like, and we're going to call it guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Shame altogether is less about grieving me, perhaps, and my maker or a deity's plural, and more about something's wrong with me. Like I'm bad. I'm going to use some moral binary terms. I'm bad. I'm broken.
I think it's that one then. It's more that one.
Like I feel a lot of shame and
I think people that leave know that it feels right and that it doesn't feel right to stay, so they leave, but then they feel shamed because they are shunned. Do you know what I mean?
yes, and the shame experience is an interesting one because as we think of just the cognitions that happen within the human mind, and the mind I'm calling the brain active, like the shame is a function of what they believed prior to their expansion or transition. And what I mean by that is if they fully believe, and we'll go back to Brad's language, which I appreciate, if they fully believed before, to a point that they maybe didn't believe it, they thought it was true, right? It was a knowledge for them. It's not even a belief, but I'm going to calling it a belief for the sake of argument. If they fully believed that if they were doing something different, then they would feel bad or broken, or we'll use that word that just echoes within the corridors of Mormonism, unworthy, then it would be terrible. And so they can get their behavior in alignment with their inner knowing and then make a change and altogether transition out of faith. Maybe they're in the faith, they just don't believe certain pieces, and then start to feel shame, even if other people aren't talking to them. But the shame is due to this internal closed feedback loop within when they were believing or knowing, as they would think, that if I do this, I'm going to be bad.
Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners what you specialize in and how you might be able to help them and how they could get a hold of you if they wanted to have a session with you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm practicing in St. George, Utah. And goodness, this is great. I get to think about what it is I do each day. I see couples, I see individuals. I have a small handful of teenagers, young adults, lots of individual adults. And I treat mood disorders. That would be depression, anxiety. I have an emphasis on faith crisis, faith expansion, faith transition, all this stuff. And, could point you in a lot of super good directions on that. I don't make any attempt to lead, I call it shelf cracking, but that's just a Justin term, but lead people in or out of a particular faith tradition, as the therapy is really about helping you get in alignment with your own inner knowing and what you find value in, and then me supporting that in whatever ways I can as you sort through your own dissonance and guilt and shame and fear and navigate your family relationships. That's where all the family therapy training comes in. I deal with trauma as well. I'm trained in EMDR and brain spotting. I do EMDR remotely, which is really cool. You can do that now online, and it's fantastic through some super cool technology platforms that I utilize. And treat marriages, mixed faith marriages. I've spent a lot of time in, and that can just be such a hard place for people too. If we have someone who says, no, I really want to do the Mormon path, and has a spouse that says, I don't think I want to do this, and I'm going to move the goalposts. Mormon leaders are moving the yard lines on the field, and I don't like that. And so I'm going to move my goalpost. And then we have a husband or wife in the stands that's saying, this isn't what I bargained for. And so that the mixed faith dynamic, that's where the marriage and family therapy training comes in, can just shred people, because the felt feelings, at least those that I've witnessed in the believer, those that staying, almost feels like infidelity.
Oh,
and to the parishioner who's exiting, it can feel like my spouse is having an affair with the church and choosing them over me. So that's a whole dynamic in that too. That. So mood disorders, trauma, couples, individuals, and faith expansion.
And even though you practice in St. George, do you do remote sessions for all of those
some remote
things?
Coaching. Yeah.
Awesome. So what we'll do is we will put a link to Justin's calendar in the show notes. Please, if you need someone to talk to, he's a great guy, and I know he'd be able to help anyone out there.
Oh, 100%. He's been instrumental in my healing, so I've seen him lots.
Thanks, Nan. You're kind. And thanks for those kind words. Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. You're a great guy.
Thank you.
We're just thrilled to have you. Thank you for adding some credibility to the Mormon Medium podcast. We really appreciate that.
Well, and also offering some hope and some light in some dark places, because I've seen personally with my clients how dark things can get and how lost they can feel. So these are some great resources and some great insights. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you on the other side of the veil.